Okay, we're going to get ready to roll. Morning, everybody. Everybody that's sitting over here, let's go work our way to the middle in here, please. And guys, you're supposed to be sitting with your class and your teacher, so please, we're not just wherever we're supposed to be here. All right, guys, we're going to get started. I want to make sure that, we're excited to have Scott Ledke here with the Holocaust Education Program. I know that you guys are going to be a great audience, and please make sure that your phones are down and off and that we're paying attention. We're going to start the morning with the Wahoo Concert Choir, and we'll go from there. So take it away, Mrs. Ware.
And just to give some context, the piece that we'll be performing is called I Believe. It was a poem or inscription that was found on a cellar in a wall in Cologne, Germany, where Jews hid from the Nazis during World War II.
I Good morning. My name is Scott Litke. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Holocaust Education. Many years ago, we started this program, the Week of Understanding, where we shared the testimony of Holocaust survivors with thousands of students during this time of year, every year. And one of the highlights for us was to come to Wahoo and to be able to do 2 programs for you. Today, we're now at a point in history, or in the story of the Holocaust, where we're losing survivors daily. And we're now at a point where most of those who were eyewitnesses to the atrocity of the Holocaust are either no longer with us or not able to share what they took part in or what they were victimized with. As a result, we're now using what we call second generation and third generation survivors, the children and grandchildren of those who experienced or the atrocities or had a very interesting element of participation within the Holocaust. One of those second generation is here today. Her name is Lori Passler. I met her about a year ago through a program that she was developing, an educational program called Courtroom 600, dealing with the aftermath and the first attempt to bring justice during a time of injustice, that being the Nuremberg trials. And she's going to talk to you about her father and his experience with World War II, with Nuremberg, with the trials, and then her own story involved with that. So please help me in welcoming Lori.
Hey everyone. Hello everyone. How you doing today? I am a very, very unlikely person to be up here speaking to you, and I'm going to tell you why. But first, I had to get out my high school yearbook this weekend and take a look back in time and think about my memories that I had of the years when I was your age. And this is just one spread here with some of my friends. I don't know, can you still buy a page in the yearbook and put your own picture on there? Is that a thing? In any case, we did that, and these are my girlfriends. They are still my beloved friends today. And I'm going to tell you about the power of enduring friendship and what it has meant to the project I'm working on, too. One of my friends here, this was on the cover of our newspaper, small town. But it's important because we are there with the school janitor. His name was Cowboy Bert, and he was beloved, and we dedicated our yearbook to him. Bert was a friend to everyone, and in particular, I really enjoyed talking to him. He cared about everyone, and this article in the paper was about what he was doing before school started. He got up and got to school at 5 in the morning to scrub off the racial slurs from the gymnasium walls so that kids would not see them when they came in. Now, I don't know if you have anything like that going in your community, but it's happening in schools, and it's a problem. My views about prejudice and racism were formed very early, and I'm vehemently against it. And so this picture is meaningful to me. So a little bit about my background, just to bring you up to speed on why I'm doing what I'm doing and how I can do it. I went to school in Tallahassee. I was from South Florida. And then I transferred to Chicago once I realized I wanted to get into communications. I wanted to be a producer. And I wanted to be in a market where I could work on broadcast journalism. I wasn't quite certain yet. So, 2 things, and we all know this. Life is what comes at you and what you pursue. It happens 2 ways like that. And once I got to Chicago, a couple of things happened. I was bartending and going to school, and all of a sudden, the owner of this bar asked me to become a DJ. And I didn't know how to do it, but I figured it out, and it was actually a lot of fun. Now, you wouldn't have want to been on the dance floor when I did a bad mix, because I could clear the floor, seriously, in my early days. In any case, I mastered it, and I applied myself to it. And then another part of life happened. After that club closed, and it was not because I was a bad DJ, although that could be attributed. I met a man who asked me to come and work with him in a radio station. And I thought, okay, this is not part of my plan, but when someone from NBC says, come on and be a personality on my show, I had to take the chance. And I said, okay, let's do it. What I learned was I'm a visual person. And while I was curious about radio, it was not the right thing for me. So I tried a couple things. Life happened, and I went with it. But then it was time to pursue my goals, finish school, intern in a production company, because again, I wanted to be a producer. And along the way, I realized that art and design and photography was all very much a part of what I love and what I wanted to do in my career. And from my perspective, if you can take your interests and mesh that with your skills, that is a rewarding career. So, 10 years ago, if someone would have asked me or said to me, you know what, in a couple of years, you're going to be spending your time searching for pictures of Hitler and his leaders and World War II and the Holocaust, I would have said, not a chance, not me, not my thing. I'm into art and design and film and other things, and history was important, but certainly not Hitler. Well, look at me now. World War II, war crimes, and the Holocaust. That's part of my life every day, and here's why. 10 years ago, when I lost my dad, I inherited a crumpled shopping bag that no one had ever seen before what was in it. And it was picture postcards, badges, and other things. It went like this. I was on a film shoot in California, and I got a call from the family, and I was told, you better get down here. You know, he's in the hospital, and it's not looking good. Well, I couldn't leave the shoot. So by the time I got back to Chicago and to Florida, my dad was already sedated in hospice. And this is where this crumpled shopping bag was handed to me. So when you're sedated, you can still hear, evidently. All right, and so there I am looking through what is in this bag, thinking, all right, well, I'm the only person in the family who knows how to use Photoshop. Maybe there's some pictures I could use to make a funeral poster. Turns out there was way more than pictures in that bag. There was a secret story. And as I pulled these things out, history hit me in the gut like you have. I've never experienced anything like that. This is my dad on the left here, and he's with guards outside the Nuremberg prison. There were women who guarded a women's wing. Interesting. So in searching for my dad's story, because I couldn't ask him anymore, I mean, all I could do was go up to him, which I did, and I said, you know what, Daddy? If you weren't dying right now, I would kill you for not telling me about this. These are his Army discharge papers. You can learn a lot from them about someone in their Army service and their medals and whatnot. And my dad was called a clerk typist. Okay. Then I get to these badges. And I'm thinking, well, if you're a typist, what are you doing in the prison? And this one on the lower right, that's a very rare badge. That's where Hermann Goering and the top Nazis were held. And it was just the knot in my stomach as I continued to pull things out of this bag. This is a credential that calls him counterintelligence, and don't ask him any questions and let him into the buildings. And so now I get to these things. He's not wearing his Army uniform anymore, And if he's a clerk typist, where's the typewriter? So this is where my journey started. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, this is what a typewriter looks like from 1945. This one in the suitcase here, this is what the correspondents carried around, kind of like a MacBook in a case. It weighs 19 pounds. I have one, I bought one on eBay. And it does nothing unless you put paper in it and an ink cartridge. And if you make a mistake, you have to use white liquid to correct it. This is what that looked like. This is a telephone in 1945. And it's not like you just pick up the phone and make a call. You have to go through a switchboard. Somebody else places your call. So, and this phone book right here, you know, I looked for my dad's name in several of these phone books in the archives, and I did find them, finally. But here's what Nuremberg looked like after the war. It was completely bombed out. 90% of the city center, complete rubble. You couldn't drink the water without putting a chlorine tablet in it. And this is what it looked like to go to work on an average day in a city like that. And I just thought, my gosh, my dad was there. He walked those streets. He saw all of this. My dad was 21 when his army picture was taken. And look how he grew up in the span of a year. All these things that he saved and hid were like breadcrumbs and puzzle pieces to a story I just had to get to the bottom of. And then there were all these smuggled army documents too. It took me years to make sense of them. You know what onion skin paper is? It's paper thin. You put multiple pieces of paper together with carbon paper in the inside, and you put it through that typewriter, and that's how you make copies. Those papers were from a secret interrogation camp where my dad spent all of summer after the war, before Nuremberg had even been decided as a place for trial. They called his anti-aircraft battalion in to guard it because they needed a place to keep the highest value Nazis. And they put a ring of electrified fence around it, and somehow my dad made it into the commandant's office. And he probably typed a lot of those papers that I have, that he hid and saved for all those years. This is a group of the people who stayed in Ashcan, that secret camp. 18 of them were the major war criminals responsible for everything that happened in World War II. The Holocaust, of course, but everything else. And this is Hermann Goering right here. He was with Hitler from the very beginning. On the right, this picture was a propaganda picture with him and Hitler plotting to go to war. When he was captured, or surrendered, I should say, by the way, he was a morphine addict, and they had to wean him off the drugs to be able to stand trial. He stole the art from Europe. Here he is with Hitler in a French museum picking out what he wants. And around this time, 80 years ago, the United States started to uncover churches and other places where it was all stashed. This is the Neuschwanstein Castle in southern Germany. Walt Disney modeled his Sleeping Beauty's castle after this. And this is where the monuments men found a huge cache of stolen art from the Nazis. When I got online 10 years ago and started looking into Nuremberg to find out more, I knew nothing. I seriously knew nothing. The internet only had the facts and figures, and the pictures of Nuremberg were postage stamp size. And I'm someone who works with photography every day. I want big pictures. I want to be able to see. And so I started to order books because I wasn't getting what I wanted online. I wanted the stories of the people who were there. What was it like? And pretty soon I had so many books that I actually rented an office because I needed a place to lay out what I was learning. And you can see my index cards. I was teaching myself the story of World War II, the Holocaust, and the Nuremberg trials. And it had become something where I was on Google every night. Pretty soon I realized I had the story of what actually went down at this trial, behind the scenes, that had never been told before. And so I needed to do something about it. And I decided to make it a project and start a nonprofit to bring it to life. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew I had to. I knew it was important to tell this story a different way, and I thought that I could. So off to the archives I went. Actually, a bucket list item, going to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., searching for traces of my father, which I did find in other archives. So let me give you a little orientation to Nuremberg. You saw the city center and how decimated it was. On the outskirts of town, this complex called the Palace of Justice, it could be repaired. It hadn't been completely bombed. And it made a perfect place to hold the trial. There was a huge office complex. Behind the office, in the radial formation, is a prison wings. And then the yellow arrow is actually pointing to Courtroom 600, which is what this project is named after. And the URL was available. This is what it looked like from the street. And the guards and the tanks. The curtains are closed on Courtroom 600 because they're filming that day. This is the jail wing where my dad had those badges to get into, the major war criminals wing. Take a look. Oh, and by the way, from Nebraska, Roy Long was a guard at Nuremberg. He knew my father 100%. He was a big football player with a record that wasn't even touched until 2004. Anyway, here's what it looked like in the prison. One guard at every cell door. That was suicide prevention. And here's Hermann Goering eating his breakfast before going to trial that day. They're pointing a light on him because they did that, again, suicide prevention. They were watching the prisoners all day and all night. And this is Courtroom 600 when it's in session. Everyone in their places, but it didn't look like that. Every piece of furniture had to be made from scratch. The whole room had to be completely reoriented to host the world's first international trial. When the Allies got here, when the Americans conquered Nuremberg in April, this is what Courtroom 600 looked like. It was being used as a rec hall for GIs. There were empty cases of Coca-Cola bottles and beer kegs and pinups on the back wall. They had to make a complete plan to reorient it and modernize it and photograph it for the world. Everyone was looking. So they knocked out the back wall, and the whole structure of the court was reoriented. Normally at the front, you would find the judge, right? Well, they replaced that with a film screen to show evidence. On the right, the judges would sit facing the defendants in the dock. And then here's what it looked like in rehearsal. You can see there's GIs sitting in for where the prisoners are going to be because they're testing the microphone equipment. This trial was conducted in 4 languages, another first for the world. Simultaneous interpretation, pioneered at Nuremberg. But here are the GIs, they're sitting on the bench, and notice there's no backs on the benches. The architect wanted to make it hard for the prisoners, but they added them at the very last minute. So you can see all the headsets. There are the interpreters, live. German, English, French, and Russian. You just turned the dial on what you understood, and you could hear it. So everyone in the court had to wear headphones. So this was the first international trial of 4 nations, our allies, Russia, which was then the Soviet Union, and France, and Great Britain, and us. 100,000 captured documents. All right, so think about it. The war ended in May in Europe, and it ended in August in the East. VE Day for victory in Europe and VJ for victory in Japan. Paper was the medium of the day. It's said that if you stretch all the paper generated at the first Nuremberg trial on top of each other, it'd be 47 miles high. But they had to translate all these documents and get them ready in just a couple of months. It was crazy. 10 million feet of film had to be screened to create the most damning evidence, the concentration camp films. Nuremberg is where the Holocaust was brought to the world, the evidence of what actually happened. So this is my vision for Courtroom 600, and I went to the archives, I got all the photos, and the first thing I did was put a gallery together to tell this story. 300 images. The henchmen, what did they do? What were their roles? How did the trial go down? And then the trial itself. So here's just an example of how that photo gallery works. Starting with their affiliation with Hitler, and this is in 1923, and ending with them in the prison. So Julius Streicher was a propagandist. He published newspapers and children's books, and he incited hatred. And he was hanged for crimes against humanity. There were 250 global correspondents that covered the trial. Everyone wanted to know about it. It was front page news. I mean, after all, World War II, over 60 million dead. Of course the world wanted justice, and they wanted to know how it was going to happen. The seats they're sitting in, by the way, came out of a Munich movie theater. I mean, remember, all of Germany and most of Europe was decimated. People had to be really resourceful in figuring out how they were going to make things happen. So they were sitting in comfy movie seats. The evidence. On the left, this is a picture taken in Buchenwald concentration camp, and the tarp is actually being held up by prisoners. What you're looking at on that table is tattooed human skins, shrunken heads, and lampshades made out of human skin. Atrocities. And on the right, what you'll see is the tattooed human chest of a man that was put into court as an evidence. All of this is part of Nuremberg. I never want to forget how overwhelmed I was with all of these people, trying to learn them. Who did what? It's overwhelming. It was overwhelming. What I wanted to do is break it down, make it engaging and interesting, and allow everyone to access this very complex period of history on your own terms, based on your interests. And so the vision I had was to create a virtual museum dedicated to teaching the lessons of Nuremberg and preserving what actually happened. And because I'm a producer, I want to do videos, 3D environments where you could walk through the rubble of Nuremberg, and of course, photos. And let me tell you something, as I was doing my research early on, I started to find myself into denier websites. And if somebody like me could land at a place like that unknowingly and really start going through it until I realized, well, trusted resources. Get the experts on board. A good producer knows to bring in the experts and build your team. And so military historians and scholars, Holocaust and World War II, they're part of the team because I don't know it, but I need to know someone who does to help us get it right. So here's what I'm working on now and first. Now that museum part, that's going to come. But the reason I'm here with you today is because we're making new learning resources that use primary sources from the Nuremberg trials to teach the history of World War II a new way. Podcasts, photo galleries, immersive, interactive media. This is my vision. And we have one module done. It's conspiracy. Conspiracy was everything. And that's with a capital C, not to be confused with small c for conspiracy theories. Conspiracy means that the Nazis conspired to wage a war. And Nuremberg proved that they waged this war because of ideology, their worldview. They thought they were better than everyone else. Nazi ideology is racial ideology. That's why they went to war. So if you listen to our podcasts, it's all narrative. It's from the perspective of you and you growing up in Germany and what did you see in your life. This is a big year. It's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war, the liberation of the camps, and the world knowing what actually happened. The end of the war in Europe is May 8th. Nuremberg started in November. Now, my father was not the best communicator, which is why it's interesting, maybe I went into communications. At dinner, he would just come out with something like, "Oh, I remember when bread was a nickel a loaf." And we would roll our eyeballs, and I would challenge my dad and say, "What are we supposed to do with that?" So my father never told us anything. I mean, if someone is talking about bread as a nickel a loaf, how is he going to come up with and say, "You know, let me tell you about how I came face to face with the worst evil men of all of history"? He couldn't do it. Instead, he left me everything that he had hid and saved, and not knowing what I would do with it. This is my favorite quote from Steve Jobs. "Creativity is just connecting things." And that's kind of the way I go about all the things that I do in my work. And so I have a crumpled shopping bag of historical artifacts that hit me in the gut and made me do something. I'm so compelled to tell this story and to tell it in a way that's different, but that engages young people, really draws you in, and helps you understand what truly happened. Nuremberg was the source of truth. Back to my girlfriends in high school and friends in general. I got to thinking that the reason I'm here and in the position I'm in, and really, we're just getting started. There's a long ways to go. But the fact that I'm here, I can trace it back to 3 girlfriends who made introductions to people in their network. And those introductions introduced me to others and others and others and clusters of networks. That is the enduring power of friends. And these women have been my lifelong friends since grade school. So friendship, I hope for all of you that you go forward and have pictures like I'm showing right now, that you kept in touch, supported one another. From shenanigans to tears, we've been through it all. But your friends got your back. So this is Courtroom 600, and that's what I'm working on. And I would love to take your questions. But I don't know if we have a microphone to get out into the audience to take some questions. I got to tell you, this happened to me, right? But if something like that happens to you, take the shot. Stand up for what you know is right and do something about it. I knew I had to.
Did your father have a diary that he kept?
Nope. But he saved all those smuggled diaries that he typed, but that was not his personally. Part of his artifacts were menus, meal tickets, postcards, pictures of people that I have looked to find and have found some. But I had to put the story together myself.
Through your experiences, did you ever have a moment, like through your research, did you ever find a photo of your father from an outside source through your digging, like just in a group of people or in some other circumstance?
I haven't found a photo of my dad yet, but I can tell you when I went to my dad's boss's archive, he was the prison commandant and head of security, and his papers are in the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Pennsylvania. And I thought, well, if I'm ever going to find a trace of my dad, that's going to be where it is. So archival research was new to me, like much of this. And they make you put gloves on when you get there. You know, you're handling their photos, and they have a real procedure. They're very militant about it. And it must have been something about how I came in and started to ask questions. The guy was like, yeah, rookie, put her in the front row so we can watch her. And you have these boxes, and you pull out a folder, and you know what you're going to look for, but the finding aids, as they're called, they don't list what's in there. This stuff is not digitized. So it's a matter of pulling out a folder and going, oh, I wonder what's going to be in here. And I open it up, and I see this 1940s notebook called, and it was labeled Prison Book of Visitors and Events. And I was like, oh, wow. I never heard about this. And I opened it up, and the whole first page was my dad's handwriting. And it's a good thing I was sitting in the front row, because I was struggling to get these latex gloves off and run to the ladies' room, because the tears were just coming out. I could not believe that I had found that. So there have been moments like that where I've been able to make the connections, and I've also connected photos of my dad with his friends to who they actually are. And one in particular, there's a film coming out this year starring Russell Crowe and Rami Malek. Maybe you know him. He played Freddie Mercury in the movie about Queen. It's a movie called Nuremberg. And the character that Rami Malek is playing is the interpreter, the prison interpreter to the psychiatrist. That was my dad's friend. And his sons made a film about him, which I found online and put two and two together. And that's what I've been doing, is calling up anybody from their obituaries. Your dad worked with my father. Instant friends. Sometimes it just works like that if you try.
Have you been able to give those people any information that they didn't know about their parent?
No, because those guys kept diaries.
Any other questions in the back here?
At the height of the German power in World War II, they had over 6,000 generals. How many of them were actually tried during the Nuremberg trials?
That's a really good question. All right, so when you say the Nuremberg trials, my dad only worked at the first one, which was the one we put on with our allies, the international trial. What came from that was so much evidence of so many crimes. And again, they're drinking through a fire hose with all these documents, trying to get them translated. And I mean, so much data. And they all saved, they were impeccable record keepers, the Germans. They had records of everything they did with their own signatures on them, and that's how the Nazis were convicted, through their own signed documents and testimony, but documentary evidence. The first trial included several military, the leaders of the military, but there was everyone from the political world, from the economic world, the bankers had their own trial. So Nuremberg, the first trial was international, and then the Americans put on 12 more trials. So when you hear Nuremberg trials, it's really 13 in total. And I am no expert on those other 12. I'm still getting my arms around this one. All right, now to answer your question about the German generals. Nuremberg was controversial in several ways. First of all, it was pioneering international law where war crimes were defined as a punishable offense. And you could not use the excuse that you were just following orders. And that is the traditional military way things are done. You follow orders. But military men were convicted and hanged at Nuremberg for what they had done. Out of 6,000, a handful. And of those 13 trials, 185 people. And you know what? It was mostly limited because that dock in the courtroom that you saw can only seat 21 people.
Right here.
So I know that a lot of the generals were able to escape captivity, but some of them were caught. Were they brought to Nuremberg to confess their crimes?
You saw that whole prisons thing. It was they could hold like hundreds of people. Oh yeah, they were brought to Nuremberg. They were brought, they were interrogated. They were witnesses in some instances. And some of them tried to be witnesses for the defense, believe it or not. But mostly, we got them to turn, and they made good on it. And so that's why we had convictions the way that we did.
Any other questions?
What's your mission today with all of it? Where do you want to go?
My mission is really to amplify the source of truth that Nuremberg is. It exposed the Holocaust for the world. Those films, the photos, you saw that evidence. That's pretty heinous, that a human being could do that to another human being. History is there for us to learn from, and I didn't realize how much I really appreciated it until I got into this project and really learned about this period of history and what actually happened. You are our future leaders. And so the choices that people made in the past shaped history, and they are there for us to learn from. Now, I don't want to sound preachy about that. Everyone has different experiences and choices that you're going to make every day. But if you look back on what you've done or what other people have done, and you see the consequences of their choices, maybe you can make some better choices for the future of our world. That's my mission.
Any other questions? Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank our guests for coming out today.
All right, guys. Let's head to third period and we'll get going. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention.